So we're going to hand it off to you. You guys ready to go?
Ready.
Let's do it.
First of all, thank you, Sean, for letting me rope you into helping me out on this talk today. Appreciate it. What I thought I would do is I'd like to have Sean set this problem up by discussing it from an agency perspective. So I'm going to kind of go here and let him talk for a little bit. And then what I'll do is I'll take the stage after that, and I'll walk you through some sort of mechanics and some observations. And then we'll wrap it up, and then we can ask a lot of questions, and between the two of us, hopefully we can answer them. So, Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure, I'll start at real high level and just say, like a lot of folks, I think we're doing a lot of mobile lately, and just a lot of behavioral and I guess I would call left brain programmatic buying from the media side, and that means a lot of data becomes important to us. But backing up on the mobile side, what's interesting about it is just really, really versatile medium. So we're doing a lot of different things there. So I figured I'd just start by talking about some of the different things we're doing, some of the different clients we have, talk about some of the data that we have available to us, and hopefully that'll set you up nicely for what you want to talk about. I like to say I like to sit up with smart people up here. I'm not usually with a NASA guy, so this is going to be a little off for me, but so bear with me. So at Media Hub, Mullen, we have a lot of different clients. So big airline, we actually have a fairly large cable television network. We have a greetings card company. We have a camera company. So we have kind of a really wide and I would say diverse range of clients that we're working with. And mobile has obviously been an explosive area for us, especially in the last 6 months or so. We've really put a big focus on it, partnering with a lot of the mobile companies, working with guys like Voltari. And a lot of the work we're doing is it's all over the place. So for an airline, you might be trying to drive someone in for a couple different things. One, you might be just trying to reach someone contextually, location-based, let's say in an airport. That's always an important place to reach them. We're also trying to drive a lot of conversion. 80% of our airlines business is online. It's JetBlue, and that's public data, so I can share that. So online and digital is an extremely important mode for them. And then you have a cable television company. What's interesting about them is that while with mobile you want to reach people on the go, we all know that like 60–70% of it's happening in the house. It's beautiful for a TV channel because a TV network's trying to get people to tune in to a television program. We're using mobile to do that. For a boot company, for instance, that has a large amount of retail, as well as an electronics retailer we're trying to drive people into store or try to drive people online to really kind of get further down into a purchase cycle and maybe even make a purchase. So needless to say, our work is a little bit all over the place in terms of mobile. And so what we've seen is that when we start to get mobile data back, and because the ecosystem, I would say, I wouldn't call it broken, but it's definitely obviously a challenge in terms of getting, really great data. We have some great third-party data, but that first-party data has been a little bit of a challenge because sometimes we're relying on partners for that. I'd say infrastructure-wise, clients still aren't quite there yet. Some are farther ahead than others, so we've had a little bit of challenge there. But one of the things that we are getting back is interaction and engagement data back from our actual campaigns. And so, for instance, you're getting now I'm going to get into the first click stuff, so I can actually finally get there. A lot of stuff we got early on, I think a lot of our partners still provide this to us, which is great, is that first click data to say, okay, we ran 10 million impressions and you actually got clicks. Now, my theory, and I've hated click-through rates for a long time. I've been in the industry for, I guess, a while, and it's all relative, but doing this for almost 15 years, it's like, okay, if I go into another meeting with a client and we talk about TV for 20 minutes and it's like, okay, the TRPs or GRPs were X, Y, and Z. That's all wonderful, great way to almost reach people. And then go into the next thing and be like, here's the digital. And they're like, why isn't anybody clicking? And you're like, why are we looking at this a different lens? So it drives me crazy that our media is often put in a different lens. Now, you can kind of go down to like the search world and say, obviously it's important in that space. I find mobile kind of in between those two kind of areas where it's like, okay, engagement's great. And some of this first click data we've been getting back has been telling us some really interesting things, stuff we didn't have in the media space before, which is like, okay, in this particular market, you're getting, men over the age of 40 at that block of the corner of the world actually engaging with you and giving you first click data. And, in this particular market, you're actually getting a completely different group. And for someone like JetBlue, it's a very market-driven brand, for instance. That's great data. Same thing with a cable TV network. We want to be able to see market by market what we're actually doing. So that's been a great piece of value. But what we actually also found too is that brand campaign, you might actually find that that first click data doesn't tell you a lot in terms of like where things are going further along in the funnel. So is that an actual valuable piece of information? We don't really know that well, to be perfectly honest with you. And the DR side of the world, we are doing some DR with mobile. We've actually found the clickers don't always convert that well. So what are we getting here? And we actually get into second click data, which is Volterra can start to give you that data. It's like where are we actually going in the funnel? That gives us some really great value. So, long story short, what we've been looking at is how can we actually come up with some new KPIs, find ways to use this data to make us smarter across the board. So just kind of a general broad stroke. That's what our perspective's been so far. Does that help you?
Yeah, perfect. So he set me up pretty well. And I'm going to start out with this next slide here. I went and pulled some data just sort of arbitrarily, and I did it because I wanted to make a couple of points. First of all, on the left-hand side, you have first-click CTR data. Everyone's familiar with that. That's exactly what Sean was describing. And on the right-hand side, you have actual conversions. So if you look at this, you've got a .54 turns into a 2.06. A .24 turns into a .71, then all the way here on the bottom, a .16 turns into a 1.4 in terms of actual conversions. This is really hard to understand. You can slice this, you can look at all the underlying data that has been aggregated up to come up with these values, and it's very difficult to understand what's going on with these campaigns. Lots of good data here, but even better data here. And so the idea is if we can begin to understand how to optimize over here, we ought to not only be able to do better over there, but this is really where we want to be. So this is what everyone does today. We start out with an engagement. We have either predefined models, segments, filters, demos, whatever your methodology du jour is. And you go to some sort of initial action, someone clicks on a banner, you collect the data, and you do it again. And everyone does this, including us. Now, what you really want to do is understand beyond this what happens. And when you look at audiences, the profiles between first and second click, they begin to deviate. And as they deviate, you get some great information. You say, okay, this is now the audience profile that I want to target. And not only do I want to target these guys, I want to make sure that my first click guys look like these, which may drive my first click CTR down, but it's really driving, I'm really focused on this guy, on my conversions. So a lot of times what we've seen anyway, when we start to optimize here, our CTRs will fall a little bit, but our conversions will go up. So here's an example. When you start to focus in on second click, or post first click, I'll call it, you get sort of a left-hand side perspective. When you look at first click, second click, you start to get a right-hand side perspective. So you're trying to convert more people over here, and here it's sort of haphazardly on your first click model. When the campaign starts, you're going to see a separation. Once you have a second click model, you're going to see a separation of audience. So the audience attributes, or the profile of the audience on the left-hand side, is going to be probably fairly different than the audiences that are actually converting. This is what we've seen. But as that campaign starts to convert, and by the way, this is my screen, and I left the models up there because I want you to see that these are two different models. This is the model that's actually driving second click conversion. And this is later in the campaign. You see that the left-hand side almost looks like the right-hand side. So what's happened here is that the second click model is driving the first click engagement that's optimizing toward those users who are going to convert. So we just have a little bit of discrepancy on age, maybe a little bit on income, but overall it's very much converging into the second click model. So if you're doing this right, your second click audience, your first click audience begins to look like your second click audience if you're optimizing on the second click versus the other way around. So this is sort of the data that I brought, and what I wanted to do is just kind of open it up for discussions, because second click actually has a whole plethora of problems associated with actually pulling it off correctly. For example, you've got to be able to pixel the landing page where you're falling on. If you don't have that information back, you're not going to be able to develop your second click model. And that's essential. You've got to be able to identify all the calls to action on your post first click opportunity in order to develop a attractive second click model that allow your first clickers to convert into converters. Oops. So can I open it up for questions and we can talk about the challenges of second click? Did I go through that too fast for everyone?
Question. In terms of volume, do you struggle with, in some of these models, getting enough sample of actual second clickers? Because I think, click-through rates in mobile can be anywhere from 0.2 to 10%. So, starting with a small pool as it is sometimes could be a challenge.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So how do you seed a second click model? There's lots of ways you can do it. If you have user profiles that you've already developed, you can actually develop a scorecard and a profile that'll actually bootstrap your second click model. If you don't have that, you can do lookalikes against your ecosystem, whatever data you've collected on second click, and use that to bootstrap your second click model. The worst case scenario is when you don't have anything and you have to organically let that second click target and reference population actually form. But by that time, you may have burned through the bulk of your impressions on your campaigns. So what you want to be able to do is take advantage of the data you have, form the models based on lookalikes that you can do against your ecosystem or previous campaigns that you've run. So for example, in the quick service restaurant areas, we actually leverage second click opportunities from other restaurants against the current QSR opportunity that we're executing. So it's a great question.
Are those QSR, are those other QSRs or just
other QSRs, or sometimes it's the same brand. It'll be the same restaurant that you've done maybe in a different geo or a different state.
So do you recommend working with you guys to work for a couple weeks before a campaign starts to collect data? Can you do that? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can start collecting data at any point in time, and what we'll do is we'll actually look at. Again, we'll look at developing lookalike models against our ecosystem, and we never want to be in a situation where we're doing this organically. We always want to be able to bootstrap it, even if it's something that the brand has given us. So if you as a brand or as an agency have a profile of those converters, so let's say you actually have first-party data of those with demos and actually RFM, recency, frequency, monetary value data of those people who converted, you can provide that data, and that data can be used as an excellent form of a scorecard opportunity for your second click model. And we've done that as well, and that actually works quite well.
I'm just going to keep asking you questions because I'm curious myself. In terms of within those profiles that you guys create, you've done a lot of this. So what particular, and this is a generalization, what particular characteristics do you think leads to a second click or conversion more than anything else? Is it location? Is it, you know what I mean? Is there a particular characteristic that you could say within a profile that tends to, that you have that maybe a display side of the world may not have that you think can help from a conversion standpoint?
Well, certainly location is a big one. Location and time of day. Those tend to pop out in these profiles. You'll see a separation of first-click audience and second-click audience with respect to those particular attributes. And then the standard demos, those will vary widely. We started a second-click campaign for a film company, and we were told the audience is 18 to 24-year-old males, and we want you to execute a campaign, focus on the conversion with these 18 to 24-year-old males. And what we discovered very quickly that it was 25 to 36-year-old females who actually were responding to this horror film. And so the second click model picked this up and began optimizing on the first click model so the sample size on the converters on the first click model, obviously the CTR dropped a little bit, but the conversions picked up on the second click model, which is what they were interested in, getting people into theaters. Or viewing the cast or watching the trailer, that kind of thing.
How the hell did you figure this out?
Well, there are actually a few people doing this kind of thing, and most of them have different types of modeling techniques that they bring to the table. But I think everyone who's going to be serious about converting is going to have to take a look at what happens after the first click. So as you work with your ad networks or your trading desks or whoever it is you're working with, you'll want to ask them about what happens after the first click, because you're interested in conversions. You're interested in and acquiring new customers, not really who's accidentally hitting your banner. There's a question in the back finally.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Okay. What about situations where the first click is on mobile web and the second click is in a native app? Have you seen that? What are you learning about sharing data? Interested in any lessons you see there?
Yeah, we definitely see that. So, for example, won't mention any names, but we have we had a situation where we had a brand that gave us first-party data of their users who were interacting with their app, and they said, "Find us more users like this." And so the objective that was to not only on the first click bootstrap the first click with the first-party data, but also on the second click, which was a landing page that this brand had with several calls to action. And one of those calls to action was to download the app and get these users into the app. So that second click model really was the nothing more than initially was nothing more than the model that was generated from the first click audience, which happened to be app. So it was a banner to mobile landing page, mobile web, and then mobile web to mobile app. So absolutely. Did I answer your question? The question is, I think I heard, am I able to pass the data from the web into the app? It depends. It depends on what store you're on, whether you're on Google Play or iOS. It depends on if you're using your own sort of probabilistic ad device identifier or whether you are using some other form of device identifier. But yes, you can do that.
Hi, my name's Terry Braga. I'm from Vistaprint. I have two questions. The first question is this model more appropriate for the mobile environment as opposed to desktop, or does it work equally as well in either situation?
Yeah, it works equally as well. We first started doing this actually on email campaigns several years ago. And so we've just simply brought it back to mobile.
When you do it on email campaigns, do you use it to determine kind of how to find the most your customers and retargeting your customers out, or acquiring customers that are like your customers in different locations?
Both. So it was used for retargeting and used for acquisition. Yes, both.
Hi, my name is Jeff Fox. Could you explain how you leverage first, second, and third-party data in your predictive modeling approach?
Yeah, so first-party data, when you can get it, that's king. You obviously want to pull your first-party data in. It's typically linked to third-party data. And then those two components together, along with any second-party data or data that you've collected off your own network, can form your training data. And that training data can be used to generate whatever types of models, predictive models, targeting models you want to generate. And so we follow that. Basically, it's a basic recipe. We follow the same process: first-party data plus second-party data plus third-party data to generate these scorecards that are used in real time by these decisioning engines. So they say, for example, are you an opportunity? Are you a high conversion opportunity? If you are, I want to go ahead and make sure I'm serving you the appropriate creative unit. So as this feedback loop comes back, you collect whether there was a response or no response, or whether there's conversion or no conversion, and you can immediately update your models to reflect that. So you may have a departure from your initial model fairly quickly, and that's not unusual. You'll start out someplace, but maybe a few. Maybe 1 million impressions or 500,000 impressions into the campaign, you have a completely different model, and you see the separation of your first click and your second click models begin to happen. And then you have the opposite effect where your first click model now becomes your second click model because you've now got enough data and enough conversions, and you're more interested in conversions than you are in people clicking on your banner. So your first click model actually becomes your second click model. I said that backwards, sorry. Your second click model becomes your first click model. Any more questions?
I have another question. what are your biggest challenges in terms of collecting all that data? I mean, how much data do you need? And we heard earlier, measurement's a challenge here, as we all know. It's evolving, but how do you deal with that fragmentation in terms of data?
Yeah, so first of all, if you don't have much data, you're not going to basically be very successful with the second click model. That's one of the downsides. You have to have data, and you have to have an ecosystem that's primed with very similar campaigns or behaviors that you can do lookalikes against if you've never run something for that particular brand or agency or type of campaign before. So you won't even achieve enough data to generate a second click model because the drop-off rates are so significant. So if you get first-party data and you're able to build a model off first-party data, you can prime your second-party model without even having any real data. As I mentioned before, you can prime it from that first-party data. So having a data ecosystem that's significantly able to fuel your second-click model is important. So anyone who's just starting out is not going to have much data and won't be able to execute a second-click model very easily unless they do one of these things I talked about, like acquiring first-party data. One last thing I will say about the second-click models is that we try to run second-click models even if we're not, when we engage with a brand or agency, we run second-click models even if the brand doesn't want them. We just won't engage them if we've been asked not to engage them. So we'll run on a first-click model. And the reason is that we want to be able to improve the learnings. How good is the second-click model compared to the first-click model? And even sometimes we'll do holdout samples where we'll actually split the campaign up, run the second-click model over the first-click model, run the first-click model by itself, and try to understand what the differences are. And I can tell you that the second-click model, from our perspective and our experience, is much more powerful than the first-click model. This is also an interesting side note, is that you may see your click-through rate drop in your first-click model, and you may see your fill rates go down while you're trying to serve this ad because you're looking for the right opportunity. That's another challenge, especially if you're coming from, say, a mediated world where you have commitments that you've made to publisher networks. You're going to want to watch that because you'll pass on a lot of opportunities that aren't there, that aren't scoring in your higher deciles. Your second-click model is driving everything, and it's going to be a lot more particular in terms of where it's going to place that ad.
Guys, just one last question. I would say, putting second-click aside for 1 second and saying, do you have advice to people in terms of working with mobile data and how to go about getting the right data and what pitfalls they might be able to avoid? I think that'd be valuable for me to know. So.
I think everyone has a challenge with mobile data because mobile data has this element of location, and then you add the temporal elements on dimensions on top of location. So you have to be able to look at this data from almost in a multivariate way across the board. So in other words, you can't go and say, I want to look at age and income and gender like we used to do in email and display. I've got to look at age, income, and gender at this location at this time of day that's going to be different than age, income, and gender at that location at that time of day. And so I think that the predictive analytic techniques have to be more sophisticated in order to compensate for, number one, the lack of cookies, the probabilistic nature of trying to identify a device, and just this additional dimension of location. It's not unusual to see a device profile or pathway or footprint, whatever you want to call it, that you might have one for home, and that home is parted up into several profiles based on what time of or what segment of the day it is. You'll have a completely different one for work, and then you'll have something in between. So I think mobile data is actually much more of a challenge in terms of analyzing it. Certainly it's not at the volume of display, but it will be there very, very soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.